Hello, and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast, where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In 2022, Counterweight, the organization that Helen Pluckrose founded and that was absorbed into the Institute for Liberal Values, had a virtual conference on alternatives to diversity and inclusion. Starting in 2025, we will be rolling out one talk a month that was presented at the conference. We sit down with the original presenters throughout 2025 to see what has changed since 2022. With diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives seemingly on the chopping block, we are curious to hear what our original participants are witnessing and experiencing on the ground. Is DEI really dead or just in remission? Are there healthy alternatives to DEI that we should consider, or do we throw the baby out with the bathwater and wipe our hands clean? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. This week, Elizabeth Spivak interviews Angel Eduardo. This interview took place in late 2024, so his views may have changed over the course of the past few months. But an update to his original talk on liberal approaches to diversity and inclusion, Angel tells us that buying into DEI is like buying a car that is a lemon. We should still buy cars, just not lemons. The best way to create the unity that was the kindest interpretation of some of the DEI movement is not to dismiss the effort to value diversity and inclusion, but rather to learn to starman our fellow citizens, embracing the best version of our humanity. You can find his original conference presentation in the show notes.
Angel Eduardo, thank you so much for meeting with us.
Thank you.
We are at the Coalition for Empowered Education Conference and spoke to you earlier about what you thought empowered education was. But also, you had done a counterweight DEI, alternatives to DEI talk almost, I think about 2 years ago now, a little more than 2 years ago. And I think the theme, sort of like empowered DEI, maybe a little bit like empowered education, empowered DEI. And so we wanted to check in with you and, what's new? What are your thoughts now? What have you been working on in that realm?
In the DEI space?
Yeah.
Not a lot in the concrete terms, but I think it's more clear now that the issues are what they are with these DEI efforts that we've been opposing, right? Because the problem is I analogize it to people are being sold lemon cars, right? They're going to the lot, they're saying, I need a car. This is what I want a car for. I want a car to do X, Y, Z. This is what I'm looking for. And the car salesman says, I've got the right thing for you, here it is. And it's not until you drive it off the lot that you realize it's not what you wanted or what you asked for. I think DEI is very similar, right? Diversity is good. We want diversity. We don't want the kind of diversity where we're just gonna, hate white people or make people feel guilty or exacerbate racial differences and things like that, right? Equity, it's people who don't own a home or do financing kind of stuff probably don't know what that word is. But it sounds like equality, and if you look it up in the dictionary, it says the quality of being fair and impartial. That sounds good.
Yeah.
So equity is good, inclusion is good, right? Inclusivity is a good thing, a general principle to have. But it's just not what we end up getting with a lot of these programs. It's just not what ends up happening. What ends up happening is that the diversity is fake. What you end up with is, I heard Barbara Fields talk about this. I think she was quoting someone else, but getting a bunch of people together who look different but think the same. That's not real diversity, right? That's a kind of superficial emphasis on skin color and all that kind of stuff. That's not actual diversity. The equity thing becomes equality of outcomes, then you regress to the mean and all that kind of stuff that has all these terrible side effects and things. And the inclusion stuff is actually the exact opposite. It's exclusionary. We're going to say, no, you don't belong here. We don't want your kind of person or people who think like this. So it's just the exact opposite of what you want, right? But I think it's wrong. It's wrong-headed and self-defeating to then, to get back to the analogy, to then say, well, you know what? We don't like cars anymore. Like, forget cars. We just shouldn't have cars, right? That's I think an impractical way of approaching this thing. What we really should do is say no. Like we should just make it that there are no lemon cars. We should make it that it's not okay for people to sell other people lemon cars. So what we need are alternatives that actually do the thing they're promising to do, which, again, another thing people contest is that there's some kind of need for this. But I do think there's a need for diversity programs, programs and training that kind of help people learn how to manage relationships and communication and conflict. It's also something that organizations and corporations want to avoid legal liability. You know, just from that pure self-preservation standpoint, that's something that makes sense. And so there should be a product that provides the thing that it says it's providing, and that does a good job. And you know, statistically, we know now, like there's a bunch of studies about the current models that they don't work. They actually make things worse, if anything. So we can do better than that.
Do you think we've made any progress in the last 2.5 years?
We've made progress in the sense that we now have much more concrete evidence, and we also have a lot of major publications, like the New York Times, for example, just published a report about all these DEI programs that don't work. So people are hip to the fact that, you know, oh, this is clearly not what people were asking for. It's clearly not working. It's actually creating way more problems. I think the fever from 2020 has kind of gone down at this point. So people are thinking a little bit more clearly and sensibly, and hopefully recognizing that there's still a space for this kind of stuff, and we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but that all these current methods of doing things just don't work and are making things worse.
So some places, corporations and schools, and either because they want to or have to, are getting rid of DEI offices, are getting rid of DEI officers, are getting rid of formal programs altogether. So how do you feel about that?
I think part of the problem has been that this enterprise has turned into this very bloated bureaucratic nightmare of there are 10 administrators to 1 in some schools and more than that in other schools. And part of your job, it becomes justifying your job. And so you're going to find problems even if there aren't any. You're going to create problems in doing that. So for the most part, I think that makes sense. I don't know that it's necessary to have an entire dedicated department 24/7 working on just this problem. That's what education is for. That's what teaching is for. We learn about these things through education, learning about other cultures, other perspectives, and all that. That should be handled by the education component. The administrative part, if there are incidents of racism and things like that in schools, sure, we need some people who can handle that sort of situation, but it's bloated to the point that I think I think it's ridiculous. I don't see any reason or feasibility to the structures that have. I think everything just kind of went haywire, and people went way too far in these directions, and we're seeing that it's not working, and we're seeing that there's a lot of just superfluous positions and administrative tasks and jobs that it clearly isn't working. At the end of the day, if it's not making money,
it will fade away.
It will fade away. If it's not making us money, if it's not working, if it's causing us more problems, which is the case with a lot of this, inevitably we're going to start cutting these things down. I'm not in favor of governmental attempts to knock these things out from an ideological perspective. Like if you're just a politician who's on the anti-side of this thing and you just want to shut it down because of the content itself or because of political or ideological and antipathy toward it, I don't think that's productive either, and that's really just ideology fighting ideology. But I do think that if something is impractical and it's not working and causing people more problems and making things worse, it should go. And as long as that's the case, then I'm okay with that.
So I've been saying this to many people. I feel like one of the things that happened was that companies and schools alike, mostly schools, sort of developed the DEI, some of the ideological stuff as a parallel mission. And again, especially schools sort of thought that their original mission didn't need to be watered and fed, and just kind of I mean, that's part of their core values, but they were like, well, we got this. We've been around for however, 100 years, or some of these, schools, or more, and that's going to take care of itself. And so we're going to develop this parallel mission, which we also value and want to invest in. And I'm not sure that I'm not sure either one is being watered and fed like it needs to be. But I'm also worried that that we won't be that the people, the movement behind that parallel mission, that they're not going to let go of that. That they're not going to not just not go quietly, but not go at all. Have we sort of graduated a cohort into that that idea, that framework, that belief that it must be a mission of each institution, wherever they work. They want it to be a mission of that institution, whether it's
to
a school.
Advance principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes, and that's I mean, when you talk to young people and say, where do you want to work? I want to work someplace where where they care about these kinds of things, like that's important to them. And the people who are already doing that work, are they going to just say, oh well, it didn't work. It didn't work for the company. It didn't make money for us. I don't know. I don't know if people are going to let go of it.
Well, that's the thing. Reality is just a brick wall, right? If something is not working, if we're losing money on this thing, if it's causing us all these problems, I'm sorry, but it's just, I'm going to let this thing go, or I'm going to fix it, right? So our job is to provide better alternatives so that the baby isn't lost in the bathwater. And their job is to improve their product if they want to continue doing business, right? There's only so much you can get out of and so far you can go constantly antagonizing people. And I think, there's a certain amount that people are going to tolerate because they feel bad about XYZ. We really, really want to do the right thing here. But after a while, they're going to sober up and realize, hey, but this doesn't make sense. Well, what about this? It's causing all these problems. Something has to break there, and maybe some organizations will double down and triple down and keep the current thing going.
Well, I don't know if the organization itself, but what about the people who have been engaged in that mission? Are they going to potentially let go of?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you can't get gigs anymore, you're gonna have to figure something out. And you can blame whoever you want to blame, but the fact remains, like, no one's calling you anymore. If that's the case, you have a few choices. But I mean, there's always going to be factions that continue in that vein, and I'm sure that's never going to completely go away. But the environment that we've been in for the last few years, where it's in our major institutions, and this particular strain of thinking is in our institutions in such a big way, right? Like, I'm not personally, I'm not even opposed to there being a department of diversity studies, and if people want to study this stuff and discuss this stuff, that's fine with me, as long as it is not the orthodoxy that must be adhered to or else. That goes against the mission of a university. It usually is going to go against the mission of any kind of organization, right? Because if you're a private business, your goal is profit. The internal workplace culture, you want it to be healthy so that you can get those profits. If this service is not doing that for you, whatever. So really, I don't know. I think these things are kind of going to arrange themselves the way they need to be. And I mean, people can fight like hell. They can fight against the dying of the light if they like. But it's really just, you're going to have to adapt or evolve, or that's going to be the end of this enterprise if no one else is interested in it. And there will always be some people, but I just think it's going to significantly go down because most reasonable people are seeing this as a lemon card. It's not what I asked for. It's not what I wanted. It's causing me all these problems. I need to get rid of this and get a new car.
So your original talk was about alternatives to DEI, and you did tell a story about an alternative that you actually suggested to the DEI, the company, and you felt like it went fairly well, right?
When I broached the topic,
yes, yeah.
It was kind of strange because I can tell no one was thinking in that way. I had introduced something that felt novel in that context, because throughout that day we had been primed to see things a certain way and respond to those questions in a certain way. But I just happened to have had that real experience, and I remembered it, and I thought to myself, but that guy's not racist. There's no way he's racist. And it makes total sense why he would have mixed up two people who look very similar, dress very similar, have glasses and long black hair. And he doesn't know people very well. And that was what I focused in on, is the fact that he doesn't know people very well. So if he knew people a little bit better as individual human beings, if he had some kind of relationship with them, it doesn't have to be a deep one, but just some kind of relationship besides, hi, hello, here's your package, that probably wouldn't have happened. And either way, it's better to assume that than to presume this whole racial dynamic stuff that, if it really was the case, it would make itself evident in many other ways. But if this is the only example of something, it's a mix-up. Mix-ups happen. My parents call me by my siblings' names all the time, right?
It's not a microaggression?
No, things like that happen. I mean, your brain gets twisted up. Even I do it, right? I call my siblings by each other's names by accident because I'm thinking about 9 things at once. This kind of stuff happens. Human beings are messy and complicated, and I think grace should be the motivating factor here. It's like, well, how can we make this better? How can we make this circumstance better? That was an awkward situation, relatively speaking. Nobody was harmed. Everything is okay. It was over when it was over, right? He was embarrassed. He walked out. We all kind of chuckled about it, went about our day, never talked about it again. So there's no real harm going on there. But sure, we can do something about that mix-up, because I can see how that awkwardness can make people feel unseen, right? So again, it's not that there are no concerns. It's not that there are no problems worth addressing. It's about how we address them and whether the way we address them causes more problems. So with respect to alternatives, I haven't found a concrete alternative to say you guys should do this program instead. There are various organizations and people working on things. Chloe Valdery has a version of DEI that she works on called Theory of Enchantment, which is quite good. Sheena Mason has her Togetherness Wayfinder, which is a very great application as well that can be used. But because it's not DEI, it doesn't call itself DEI, and it's not necessarily the exact same thing, it may not be a sufficient alternative. So something else still needs to be developed where we say, look, we are trying to do the thing that DEI says, but we're just not doing it that way. That's going to cause all these problems. So I know FAIR, the organization that I'm on the board for, has a fair diversity program, but it's still kind of being put together. So we're still in the middle of the search. We're still working on these potential alternatives. I don't think the need will ever go away, right? America is a multicultural society. There's people from all over the place, different contexts, different cultures, different ways of being, different ways of communicating. And when you put a bunch of people together, there's going to be conflict and tension and some difficulty in how people communicate. And it makes sense for a company to want to figure out ways to smooth that over so that their employees are happier and more productive. That's a sensible goal to have. We just need to provide better products and services to give them that.
So you should tell people what star manning is.
Star manning.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, so the straw man fallacy, most people know. If you're in this space, you've heard of the straw man fallacy. It's when you caricature or distort someone's perspective into something that's easier to disagree with and tear down. And what you should do instead of that is to steel man, which is to engage with the strongest and most charitable version of your opponent's argument. In practice, that's basically repeating their position back to them in a way that they would agree with. And you get bonus points if you can articulate it in a way that they would say, actually, that's better than I would have put it. It puts you on good footing with them. It ensures them that you're listening and actually engaging with what they're really saying. And it also confirms for you that you're on the right page and you get what's going on and you're not wasting your time engaging with the caricature. But unfortunately, most people don't steel man very often. And part of the reason I've concluded is that we're not just straw manning each other's arguments, we're straw manning each other. So we have distorted perceptions of the people who make arguments against our positions. We assume that they're more than just wrong. They're hopelessly stupid, or they're malicious. They're trying to destroy everything we care about and everything that matters. This is false in my view. And so the way to counteract that is what I call star manning, which is to engage with the strongest and most possible version, not only of your opponent's argument, but also of your opponent.
As a person.
As a human being. And we do that by locating and explicitly acknowledging the fundamental human desires that are motivating their perspectives and undergirding their arguments. And you do that through conversation. You do that through questioning, through trying to figure it out. What is it that they care about? What really matters to them? Why do they hold the position that they hold? And how can I connect with that why? What are the fundamental human values that I share? And it's about seeking that out and looking for that and kind of rehumanizing your opponent and recognizing that they're coming from a place where they're the product of their environment, their education, their experiences, their parents, their peers, their psychologies, right, their temperaments. And all of that kind of mixes together to create who they are and why they believe what they believe. And that's the same goes for us. Each of us, that's exactly the circumstance we're in. Everything that happened to us, everything that we've done, everything we haven't done, everyone we've spoken to and not spoken to, all of it has led up to who we are and what we're thinking right now. And when you recognize that, you start to see a whole human being, and you can see the ways in which, if you were them, and if you had the experiences and upbringings and everything that they had, you would think exactly the way they do. And you only don't because you had a different set of circumstances, right? And that allows you to be more effective, either in persuading them to see your side of things or in opposing them, right? Because if you want to be effective in pushing back against ideas or people that you think are harmful or wrong, you have to understand them on a deeper level, right? You have to really know what's going on here. If you have a misdiagnosis of the problem, your solution is probably not going to work. And that's what so much of our discourse is people operating under these erroneous assumptions. And in my view, star manning is based on a very simple and very safe assumption. And that is that very, very few people are consciously attempting to make the world a worse place to live. Most people, most of the time, are doing what they believe is good and right and just, or at least justifiable, given their goals. And those goals matter. And it's our job, if we want to be effective communicators, persuaders, or effective advocates for our causes, it's incumbent upon us to find out what those goals are and why people have them. And because they're stupid or because they're evil are not the right answers.
So, two particular sort of lines of research in psychology, which is my field, come to mind. One is there's a particular study that says, I know why you voted for whomever it is, okay? And over in multiple studies in this paper, they found that people just assumed that the reason someone voted for whomever it was because of the strongest opinion that candidate held. So whatever, and I say strongest,
most fervent.
Yes. And so if it was, it's like, I know why you voted for Trump. It was because of immigration.
Right.
I know why you voted for, Biden. It was because of, something else, So it's like, we could go through these, and they had fictional candidates and they had real candidates in the experiment. Local, and over again, people just made the assumption that they knew the person in these fictional scenarios. They knew the person in this little paragraph well enough to say, I know why that person voted that way. So they know they're in a research study, they know these are fake people, and yet they would even gamble away their research money. So it's like, I'm gonna pay you $5 to participate in this research study. You'll get 0 if you guess wrong, and you'll get $10 if you guess right. People were so sure that they gambled away their research money. They're that sure within the research study of a paragraph about a fictional person, okay? And then the other, which I actually had mentioned to you earlier when we were talking, is the research on personality. So and I do think this is sort of what you're talking about, like there's a nomothetic version of personality, which is sort of filling out those little surveys. So it's like, how much do you say that you like to, talk with other people? These little, I mean, some of them are just 40 questions, and you get the big 5, right? So, and then there's the idiographic version of personality, where it's you and me sitting and talking and learning about each other. And in between that, that sort of nomothetic personality of a stranger is what Dan McAdams would call it, that you can sort of glean just by sort of watching people, maybe even at this conference that we're at. Who interacts with who goes to find a table by themselves at lunch, and who goes right up to the, and we make assumptions about people based on these very superficial things.
Right.
And then in between, you had mentioned like motives and goals, right? And that we go too quickly from this this nomothetic kind of like superficial version to then assume the motives and goals, right? Without the idiographic, knowing people's stories.
Right.
And we might even assume people's stories based on just this very superficial look at people. And so when we really know people, it isn't from that superficial look, it's not even from their motives and goals. That helps, but it's really from knowing their stories. And we don't have to know all of their stories. And this is what you had talked about in your previous, in the alternatives to DEI, was one of the things that you suggested is that a new person actually spends some time just sitting with, and you're not going to like reveal your life story, right? But just that a story, an interaction. What brought you here? How did you?
Just some point of connection.
Right. And then that opens the door to learning more about somebody, and maybe we won't make these assumptions just based on superficials. We still will sometimes. It's only human nature, right?
I mean, I know my siblings pretty well, but I still mix them up.
Yeah, right.
I still mix up their names.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes we know them so well that we make assumptions that might be typically true, but in this case are not true at all, right? We sometimes we use our knowledge in a not a very helpful way too.
True. No, that's true. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
But we can't know everyone's stories, right? And if we're making assumptions about people's motives and goals based on these superficials, just what's our what can we do? What can we can't know we can't know our entire organization stories, and I think we are too quick, as you point out. We're too quick to just assume, and I don't know what the answer is, but it makes me the answer. I don't know what an answer, and what one of many. There's many answers, and maybe we all need a somewhat unique answer.
I think so. Well, the star manning assumption that most people are behaving in such a way that, they're doing what they believe they need to do to accomplish some kind of goal, and that goal is usually not destroy the world.
Not nefarious.
Right? Yeah, it's usually not I want to cause as much pain and suffering as possible. Right? It's like, no, I want to be a good person. I want to take care of my family. I want to do these things. We can make those assumptions. It's funny because there are plenty of things we can assume very safely about people that we just don't, right? We can assume that any random person we encounter on the street likely loves their family, cares about them, wants them to be okay. They're doing their best to be the best version of themselves they can be, whatever they're struggling with. They're probably struggling with any number of things that we have no idea about. We can assume all those things because that's the human experience. But we fly right past that stuff and go, well, he's probably voting for XYZ person because he hates, so it's just, we make these kind of self-serving assumptions,
Yeah, because the right assumption would be, I don't know why that person voted for
right.
that. I mean, that's the right answer. I don't know.
I don't know why they voted, but I can certainly assume that from their perspective, they're doing what is best, right? They're saying, well, given the choices I have, this is what I think the best thing to do is. It's highly unlikely that they're twirling their mustaches and saying, I think this one will cause the most pain and destruction, and I'm going to go for that, right? Most people just don't act like that. So that's an assumption we can make without knowing people's stories, without knowing them at all. You pick a stranger on the street, it's just highly unlikely that they're a psychopath and a murderer, right? It's just not, that's not how it is, right?
So this is an exercise we could do, like while we're on the train or while we're in our cars. We could just practice thinking, it's like, oh, that person, that's sitting next to me or sitting across from me, what can I think about them that isn't, oh, I know who they are because of the way that they look or whatever, but how can I think about them in a creative way?
Imagine, there are all kinds of I guess cliches at this point. Like everyone is fighting a war you don't know anything about. Walk a mile in somebody's shoes, and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of truth and wisdom there, in the sense that you have no idea what's going on with people, and it's just there's my brother calls it protagonism. It's we're the main character of the universe because we're stuck in our own subjectivity, and everyone else is just a supporting character in our story. But we're a supporting character in their story.
Yep.
And that's how it works for them too, and there's the fundamental attribution error, right? I like to say that it's, people say, I have reasons, but they have excuses, right? And we're more generous to ourselves when things go wrong because we understand everything that led
all
to
the
that,
situational
right? So
influences.
I'm late because I got a flat tire, and then there was an accident in front of me, and then my mom called, and I had to pull over. We know all those details,
right.
But when someone else is late, they're irresponsible, they're lazy, they do not respect my time. You have no idea if their mom called or if they got in an accident, and we immediately go past that stuff, and we just assume the worst because we can't automatically see everything that led up to, from when they woke up to stumbling into the room late. We don't pause to assume that. There was one time I was walking on the way to the train station, and the streets were bumper to bumper traffic. There was so much traffic, and there was a bus stuck trying to make a right turn. And behind that bus was this car, and this guy was just beeping furiously and losing his mind. As I'm walking by, I'm seeing him just having a meltdown in his car. He's late, whatever it is, right? And the bus isn't moving. And then as I keep walking, I see that there was actually a bicycle accident in front of the bus, right? Someone had collided with somebody. I think everybody was okay, but there was a situation. But this guy can't see past the bus. He just sees the bus that's keeping him from moving, and whatever it is that he's worried about or late for, that's what he's concerned with, and he has no idea what's going on. And in that moment, he's not thinking about what the possible reasons could be for this bus not moving. All he's thinking about is what he needs to worry about for himself. But I have the vantage point of seeing everything, and I feel for the guy, whatever's going on with you. I hope you're not late to something important.
Hopefully his wife's not having a baby.
Right, I hope all that stuff is okay, right? I feel for the bus driver who's, all the passengers are probably getting irritated. And I feel for these people who are in this bike accident. I hope they're okay too. I can see all of that, so that it allows me to have this, not detached, but a wider perspective. And I can feel compassion for every component in that dynamic, right? In a way that this person in the car having the meltdown currently can't. But it's a skill that we can have, that we can develop, so that we can recognize, even in those really difficult moments, there are plenty of things going on right now that I'm not aware of, and they probably have something to do with why I'm in this circumstance. And given the grand scheme of things, maybe there's a better way I can handle this. Maybe there's a better way I can engage. Beeping furiously and losing my mind in my car is probably not making anything work faster. You know, so I mean, stick your head out the window, try to see what's going on, see if maybe you can get out of the way, right? There's things to do, but we default to that because we're so stuck in ourselves. And maybe it's because I'm a writer and an artist, and part of my job is inhabiting other perspectives, that I've developed this ability to do that. And so I annoy people often. I annoy my wife often when I immediately go, well, here are the 9 possible things that
She does
could
not want to hear
potentially
that
be happening.
sometimes.
And yeah, because right now I'm feeling what I'm feeling, and you're out here in outer space, right? So I'm being a jerk, but I can't help but do that. And you know, I recognize all these possible reasons why I might be misunderstanding something or missing something, and I don't want to act too quickly or rashly because there may be things I don't understand, right? Like, one other thing about me is that every single time, and I'm not exaggerating, I mean every single time that I have lost my temper and I've decided I've had it with this, I've had it with this person, and I lash out, I have always discovered that there was something I wasn't seeing, there was something I wasn't understanding that changed the circumstance completely and meant that my behavior was the absolute worst way to handle it, right? This person didn't actually say what I thought they said, or wasn't actually responsible for the thing that was causing me distress, or whatever it is. But then I lashed out at this person, and now I'm causing another problem on top of all the other stuff that's going on. And now I have to carry that with me, feel bad about it for the rest of my life because I did this stupid thing. So now I'm very almost reflexively, I have this reflexive aversion to lashing out and reacting impulsively. I try to train myself to take a step back and go, all right, what is going on here? Let me make sure that I know before I react. And is this the best way to react? Maybe there's a more productive way to react. I fail all the time, but that's the goal. I think we can do that, and that will help us with conversations, that'll help us with solving these problems with DEI and all that kind of stuff. It's all it all boils back down to human relationships, human understanding, communicating with one another better, trying to understand one another better, and recognizing that we're not as different as it might seem when we dig a little bit deeper.
That might be a good place to end.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.